Welcome, everybody. So this is a little talk about stepping onto your Dharma path. There are so many things that could be said, and I definitely don't want to limit you through what is said here. This particular presentation flowed from a thought process that I was in at one particular time. And yeah, I just really want to say there's so many angles we can approach this from, but I do hope that it helps you on your way. So we're going to look a little bit at the concept of mapping your ecosystem, this whole concept of your own karma that can be your upbringing, all sorts of things, and how you can transform that into propelling you further into your dharma. I just want to make a distinction that karma is ever forming and ever ripening, but we have certain karmas that are more fixed than others, and some things are easier to dance with than others to pivot you into your dharma path. Like, you have the karma to have the color of eyes you do. How much is that really going to inform on your dharma path? So we talk a lot in certain circles about from karma to dharma. I just want to make the distinction that it's not always the case that karma morphs into dharma, okay? But for the purpose of this discussion, we're going to look at how we can tantrically weave with some things and to help to propel those forth into our dharma. And as I say, there are many more examples that you might be able to apply yourself. We're also going to look at the concept of energy levels, personality type. We're going to look at astrological systems. We're going to look a little bit at Vedic astrology and some of the karma dharma markers. We're going to look at the gene keys system brought through by Richard Rudd, which builds upon the human design system. We're also going to talk a little bit about the Bodhisattva codes, the CDs, the superpowers, and how they may or may not propel us forth in our Dharma. Also, we'll talk a little bit about some tantric approaches to Dharma. And then we'll look a little bit at Western value systems around what Dharma is, and maybe to propel us into maybe more tantric understanding of Dharma that can help us to become more versatile and to utilize everything that comes in our path. Then it's really important that we, propelling into that as well, is this concept of elimination of bias and honoring that the designation is the journey, which really also connects to this concept of removing agendas and fixed notions of what Dharma may be, and to also understand the cyclic evolutionary nature of things as a code for higher weaving. Okay. So here's a picture of Maat from the Kemetic pantheon. And Maat is a deep, deep beacon or archetype for true judgment, balance, and there's a rightful justice around Maat energies. Maat does not shirk from high law, okay? And part of becoming someone who is going to be working with higher law and cultivating on a higher level is actually about knowing thyself. And knowing thyself means understanding that your afflictions, your karmas, are habits to be overcome, how you can use those to propel into something higher. And it's also about understanding maybe why your karma has created the individuation that is you in this life and how you can utilize that. I see sometimes, okay, I'm going to talk about something here. It's got different facets to it, okay? It's really important that we don't just do the things that we want to do, because we'll never learn discipline, sacrifice, humility if we don't. But I also see a lot of organizations who don't utilize the unique skills of people, and actually it just slows everything down. And I think that any given Dharma path needs to have some things that are responsibilities that you maybe don't enjoy as your social life. And then also there's things that come really easily to you and you're really good at. But we have in astrology, you'll see we develop sometimes the things that we thought we're just terrible at actually become something we become a shining star in later years, because once some more karma ripens around that, you suddenly see, wow, I really understand this thing now, or wow, I've gone through so many life changes and trials and tribulations that this thing is no longer difficult for me. And actually, I really want to show this to the world. Okay. So we should never try to limit ourselves or to try to become too fixated on what our Dharma is. And I can tell you this from an astrology perspective as well, is that we have different parts of our chart activating over different periods of time. And therefore, if we think, okay, I just do this, then maybe 2.5 years later, when a dasha period changes, or 18 months later, when the karmic nodes change, we suddenly realize we've got this whole other way of looking at things and a whole other batch of conditions that are now what we need to pay attention to. So please understand that mapping yourself is not something that's supposed to get stuck in space and time, but there are certain things that are already there as conditions that you can really use to help you. So, okay, let's talk about some of those. So, for instance, there are some of the conditions around the parents that you had in this life, and maybe what they did, what profession they have, what area you grew up in, what school you went to, what language you speak, what cultural traditions are followed, if any, in your area. And all of these things, for instance, the language you speak, means that for some reason you've got a shared karma with people from that language group. So, yes, you might be someone who has in their karma the ability to travel and needs to travel, and that you learn languages quite easily. So maybe it's you're more of a cross-pollinator, or you are multilingual. But a lot of people are going to find that, yeah, I work mostly with my language group because it really makes sense, doesn't it? And I've been applying this recently to analyzing my own Dharma with things like Khenpo Rinpoche's organizations. And I've been watching where there are obstacles, and I've been watching where there is flow. And there's more flow for me in Europe. And that makes total sense to me, having studied permaculture. It's like I know Europe quite well. I used to travel quite extensively around Europe for many years. And I have enough grounding in several European languages to get by. And I kind of, they have a kind of ashram in Germany. And I don't speak German, but I kind of could get by if I have to there. And even some of the countries it's beside, there's an affinity with me and the people from the closest proximity countries to where that ashram is. Okay. And I've had to really look over the years. For instance, okay, I've got the karma. My father's getting older. One of my aunts is getting older. My sister and her children live in England. So Ireland and England are places where my family are. So that's part of my karma, is that I need to be paying attention to that. I'm not fully estranged from my family. We're not super close, which helps my spiritual dharma, but I care about them. And when they need me in the big moments, I'm going to be there. So it's part of my karma to have a connection with Ireland and England and Europe. But I also have some karma with Mexico. That's been very obvious for some years. So mapping, I think that sometimes I see a lot of this with people who are wanting to set out these brave new eco projects in places. And I have spent many years mapping projects and visiting amazing visionary places all around the world. And as I got older, and possibly, I don't know if I ever was really yearning to set somewhere up very, very far away, but it's a lot of travel to go to some of these remote places. And I was seeing there's a younger guy who's, for some reason, a friend of mine on Facebook. And he's been appointed a role with a visionary set of projects that are in Costa Rica and other places. And I don't know enough about this person and their work, but a lot of people are going to Costa Rica at the moment. And this guy's English. And I just want to talk about what somebody said in his chat section yesterday. Somebody said, you're loving it right now, but after about 4 journeys, that you might be looking at this really differently. And he was talking about how he'd been on 3 different planes that day. And he was making this comment about, oh, do you think I'm a climate criminal? And, this is this world-changing project. And I happen to have been on 3 planes today because the project wanted me to. And so this person was saying, it might seem really cool at the moment, but suddenly when you really get closer to being your reality, you're going to see how much that's going to become a challenge. And this is something I've seen over many years. Is I used to have friends, we used to say, oh, we want to set up an eco project. And then maybe I was in Brazil and we found this place and it's like 3 hours from the closest small town and all of these things. And even for the Brazilians, it's a big country. And my body was just like, no, this is definitely not the project for me. And I know that my karma is that I'm European, although I have a connection to Spanish speaking countries as well. And I have in my astrological chart probably the possibility of always being having 2 places, but I've also got wandering in that. So I travel, but where I'm choosing to travel to as I become older is becoming lesser and lesser because really my karma with where I grew up, where my family are, what they may need, all of those things, as I probably become more responsible, it becomes a factor that is easier for me to say. I've been to Costa Rica, but that's exactly what I thought. It's like, wow, everything's going to take forever. And what if you need to get back immediately? It's maybe fine for somebody who lives in Colombia or maybe even the US, but really there's a lot of flights need to be taken. And it can feel awfully long when we are having to suddenly think about the jet lag if you decide to live in 2 places like Europe and Costa Rica all the time, then wow, it's a lot of travel time. Okay. So, but some people, that's their karma actually, to spend that time traveling and to live in a remote place. And yeah, this is the sort of thing that will help you to look at your dharma. So it's been quite easy for me to see what the universe is telling me through what can play through, sometimes as obstacles, as chaos, with maybe some of the more international elements of certain dharma organizations, is that the flow for me is actually in Europe, and I understand permaculture. So I understand, well, of course, it makes sense. I can, it might still be a day's travel, but it's not overnight sleeping. There's no jet lag. I can, and I'm now investigating even ways that I can make that work more easily. So these things are signs that can help you actually understand your Dharma if you map them. For instance, I did do a little bit of German at school. I learned French. And that helped me learning Spanish probably. And I look at these things and just think, yeah, and I feel European. I don't feel particularly English or particularly Irish. I feel Celtic and European. Okay, so look at these things that are, because sometimes we become so obsessed about some ideas that we're not checking what the conditions really are. And so you have these markers, plus you will have astrological times when it changes, but really look at these things. Also, for instance, for years I've done travels and work with many different ethnic groups and tribal groups. And within myself, I always knew I know where I'm from. I'd never had a problem with that. I might not associate with it very much, but I don't have a problem saying I'm a white person from Northern Ireland. Okay. And I could always see that I was learning something with different tribes. Whereas you'll have some people who really get fully adopted into another tribe and live there for the rest of their lives. And it's always been clear to me that my culture is my culture. I spend some of the year away, and by the time I come back to Europe every year after a winter away, I'm quite happy to be in European culture, even though some of it's very crazy, because I identify with that culture. And so the way the Dharma is for me is even, for instance, things like, okay, certain tribal practices that I have learned or been a part of, or even Dharma practices of the Tibetan lineage, sometimes my body feels very allergic because within my sense of self, I know it's not my culture and it's not my full Dharma to be totally embroiled. Whereas there will be other people who are learning Tibetan or learning the language of that tribe because I'm more of a bridge being. And you can see that through some of my astrology, which shows my hybrid nature, okay, by feeding two worlds. So forgive me for using myself here as an example, or the person formerly known as myself, but it's just you know me a little bit, and it can help you to understand how to break it down for yourself, because there's a reason for all of this. That's really the final bit I want to say. There's a reason for all of this. This is your karma. So that doesn't mean that you won't have journeys in your life, but just really seeing what's this, what are my conditions? Because that creates different traits in you that will lead to different propensities to behave in certain ways. And that then informs on your Dharma. Okay. So we can also look at natural ecosystems. And in any ecosystem, I'll talk about maybe a forest. You might have a big tree, then you might have some energies, maybe some mycelium that's doing connectivity underneath the earth, but then you might have some fungus or something that's breaking down and mulching things. You might have some comfrey there, probably not in a forest, but you might have some comfrey there decomposing things and mulching with that, and then creating fertilizer out of that. You might have little bees, you might have flowers there. And then, so they're, magnetizing. They're magnetizing the bees. So they're very attractive, and they're using their magnetic properties to bring more visitors to that ecosystem. And then you might have the cross pollinators, the bees, going from one flower to the other in between their own system, and then occasionally longer distance. Then you might have some animal that's got a bigger body that comes and eats stuff, which helps to distribute pollen, and maybe poos there, and that becomes, manure in some way, and then it travels further away, but it's got the pollen on its back, and it travels further distances. So, can you see what your role might be in a human ecosystem? We have these roles playing out in our own organic organizational structures and many more. But if you start to look at that, how do you use your energy? How do you work in a setup? And look and observe a natural system, and then see what kind of role you fulfill. This will really help you to understand your Dharma again, because are you a pillar and a gatekeeper? Are you a cross pollinator? Are you someone who transmutes things for other people? Are you a sustainer? Are you just something that's there that not just, but you keep the stability of that ecosystem, or you rock there? All of these things really, really important. And of course, like everything, this might change. You may realize, well, when I was younger, I had so much energy and I was always making friends with everybody and starting new networks. And then you might realize that that has informed on you being now like a pillar, because you learned a lot and now you hold that and you don't need to travel anymore, because actually you've got it all and people come to you for that. Okay. They come to sit under your branches for shade or whatever. Okay. They come to meet under you, whatever. Okay. It's also really important to understand if you're an introvert and an extrovert. And, there's, I forget the name, I forget these things sometimes, but there's the classification where you can be like an, INFJ or whatever, that you might be an introvert and extrovert, but then you've got other ways of working. And there are, like human design, there are different ways. There's about 16 different classifications, and that helps you to understand how you operate in certain settings. And some people are a mixture of an introvert and an extrovert, depending on the setting. Some people are very, very, very introverted, but then the minute it's about something that they know is part of their dharma, they light up. And I can remember Ernst Wilhelm, amazing Vedic astrologer, just saying how, with his dharma to be this amazing visionary for Vedic astrology, bringing a lot of insights through to the West. He said, sometimes I'm just a total train wreck. But then the minute I start teaching, because I'm supposed to do this, it just lights up. And this is the same for some of us when we do like therapy or teaching. A part of us that's just so innate as part of our dharma, it just lightens up and just it's there. And so people can be quite introverted, but appear as an extrovert because they are able to light up when they do the thing that is their dharma. Then you have these people who just are the life and the soul of the party. But it's really important for you to know what you are, because you use your energy differently. Extroverts almost love being in places because they love taking energy from the thrill of the place, whereas introverts get quite tired and overwhelmed by too much stimuli and are quite happy on their own. It's quite excruciating sometimes to think of settings with loads of people, whereas extroverts love being in really busy settings. So understanding which you are is really important, and understanding actually, is that in all settings or is that in some? It will help you to manage your time wisely and to find your dharma more appropriately. I think that with this grand age of social media, where we have so many influencers and people trying to be influencers, and obviously a lot of these people are extroverts, but I think it's very difficult for a lot of people because they see these super confident people shouting and being very overt, and sometimes it can make people feel lesser because they don't feel that way, and then they may try to be that way when that's not really what's needed. A lot of the a lot of the most humble work and behind the scenes work is what makes things happen, and it's all worthy, it's all really important. Okay. Also, in a lot of business modeling, we look at if somebody is a good starter of projects, or are they a good ender, or are they somebody who's really good at, once an entrepreneur has activated a vision, can they then go and really keep that on the ground to make it happen? And you'll see some people who don't really aspire to climbing a ladder, and they're really important for organizations because they're not going to just compete for every new job role possible, and they're actually just fine. Just, I go to work, I do my job really well, I keep things ticking over. These people are really important. And again, we have this Western individualistic model, which is always looking as if the person who's the front or the starter is the most important. And it's actually not. It's a very noble role to be a sustainer. And you'll find that a lot of people who are quite entrepreneurial are really bad at ending projects because they've got this activation vision, but they move on very quickly to other things. And that can be quite destabilizing. So it's really good to map this and ask people, because what can happen is if you don't share this between an organization, if you don't deconstruct this, you can come into trouble because communication problems can break down because people may expect someone else to fulfill their dharma in a certain sort of way. Okay, and this is why the mapping of yourself, the more you can know thyself, and then you can sometimes say to people, oh, look, I'm a good sustainer or I'm a good activator. Because, as I say, it's really important that we all do volunteer work and things, and all go and scrub those toilets and chop those carrots and paint those walls and do those things that we might not even be that great at. But it's not going to create a sustainable golden age dharma system if everybody's doing what they're really bad at. And sometimes it's a really good thing to, once a group know each other really well and they don't have something that's time sensitive to do, when people are bonded and they're doing things, to then skill swap and to do something you're not very good at, so that everybody's having empathy for some of the challenges within that job. And yeah, it just shakes things up. But there's no point in doing that if we're trying to get a golden age up and running and people don't even know each other. You need to just be functional as much as possible, but all be willing to do those responsibilities, those tasks that help you grow and gain humility. Okay. So mapping also your energy. Some people work in bursts and other people really sit down and do something for many hours. Like I'm quite a burst sort of person. So sometimes I'm like, oh, how am I going to get everything done today? And then I get it all done because I sit down and just do 15 minutes of each, and then suddenly it just doesn't feel so hard anymore. And it's like, oh, that was actually really quite easy. Other people will sit down and really grapple with something, and they actually find it very discombobulating to do bursts. They find it destabilizing. So working out your energy, and are you somebody with a lot of stamina, or uh, do you need quite a lot of rest? It's really important that you know that. And this leads into also being realistic about where you are in your own trauma healing journey. I think, yeah, a lot of times when we go into a karma dharma container, we're there to move through karma with other people. But it's good for you to be self-reflexive about how much work you've really done on some big things in your life. Because if you've still got a lot of karma playing through as trauma, it would be better to spend the time working on that rather than over idealizing on what you're going to do. And I've seen this in some people. Sometimes people come and say, oh, I want to migrate to making this wonderful spiritual enterprise. But actually, what they really probably need is weekly therapy and maybe coaching and some deep trauma work and clearing, so that they can actually really meet stuff head on, because they can't show up. A lot of people are still displaying a lot of trauma signs by dissociating all the time, not being present. So if you're finding it's hard to be present in places, or you're becoming avoidant, checking out, start to realize you may have some karma in the form of trauma that needs to be worked with, and just be realistic about it, because when you work with that and overcome that, it's going to bring you closer to your dharma. This leads into what we call the Lajitadhyavashtas in astrology and Vedic astrology. And if you are aware of those, you're going to have a closer, more realistic ability to see where default behaviors have become the norm that are actually taking you off your Dharma path. And yeah, I have got a free audio about this that people get when they do a reading with me, but it's just a little bit of an introduction to this style of astrology. This is very important because karma creates habits, but habits can be overcome. And when you overcome habits, you actually become closer to your dharma. But if you have no awareness of them, you're fully blended for a long time. And so you're not even, you're a person who's guided by your unconscious. And so this can mean that you're still constantly sabotaging the relationships or the growth or the pathway that's going to lead you to your true dharma. So really starting to understand those things. We have these tools available for us. Go for it. Okay. So coming back to this concept of the changing energy over time. And oh goodness, I've kind of cut and pasted this into a later slide. I was like, oh, I've seen this before. But yeah, anyway, I'll talk about it in a different way later. So this is this whole thing. Everything changes. This is one of the only principles that is constant, is that everything is impermanent. And what I think is so amazing is that astrology points this out. If you work with a good astrologer who doesn't trap you in time, And we see this in many systems. You can see, for instance, let me just check what's the next slide. Yeah, okay. So in the Mayan calendar, we have the energy that we brought through from the ancestors, and that's usually quite strong in who we are when we're very young. And then sometime between about 10 and 15 or 16, depending on our chart, we then come into our deeper personal energy. And then at 52, we peak at a new energy, but that starts to grow as early as 26. And so everything would be a bit crazy if we just stayed the same person and stayed fixating on the same stuff. And the astrology shows that as we work through things ripening, that our role in society changes. And so our Dharma changes. And you can see these markers in the Mayan chart. It's really, really, really beautiful because it's not the most, for me, it's not the most sophisticated system, but there's a truth in it that's really, really helpful to anchor people. I think it's a really good anchor point for our role in society and that karma that we have around who I am, what I show up as in my community, excuse me, and things like that. So, yeah, so the simplicity is a good way for actually aligning with that. In Vedic astrology, we have the natal chart, and then we have many, many other divisional charts. The first divisional chart that we look at in conjunction with the natal chart is the D9 chart. And the 9th house is our Dharma house in astrology and in Vedic astrology. And so basically the divisional chart of D9 is like a micro reading of the 9th house made into its own chart. And so looking at the D9 shows us in many ways the journey from birth and what we came in with, and then how that turns into who we become and what that starts to manifest as. So it's very fascinating. And again, it stops us from being two-dimensional. It helps us to remember that our karma and dharma are always changing. And it helps us to then get our aspirations straight on our dharma and to look at what that's saying. So if we have certain results in those charts, then that's going to help us to focus. You know, somebody might be somebody who's supposed to be very generous and give a lot of money to organizations in this life, whereas somebody else is maybe supposed to be a very nurturing, motherly person and help to heal people. And then somebody else has maybe got a really pioneering spirit to bring some new, novel teaching device through or whatever, okay? So the karma markers that we see, you have karma markers and dharma markers. Everything is karma, of course, but you have these ones that the karma is sitting in a dharma position. And we can transform all of them along the way. And this is why we need to be open to the evolutionary nature of things, that it's always building upon something. And therefore, it's really about the adaptability that we show to keep evolving. And this, as we'll see later, is very connected to the concept of tantrism, tantric principles. So what I want to posit here is that we become overly reductionist if we just focus on being victims to our karma and our trauma. And it's all there to be utilized and transmuted and danced with, or to be something, you know, we go to therapy for 40 years about something, we become a master in it. And just if you can realize that these two can be impermanent and that they're just a stepping stone, the charge of these things can be lessened because you can use them to see how it's going to help you to actually step into being more fulfilled by your Dharma. And so if you can start to see that, you can maybe let go of the charge of some of these traumas, and karmas. A lot of the things that we see in these earlier parts of people's charts are things that, for many of us, there's only a little bit of residue left because we've actually done a lot of the work. And so often the decision to be null and voiding it is all that's needed. And so the willingness to let go of being identified with those is really important as deciding that we're going to become Dharma, being with everything that we can.